We are live. Welcome back. This is episode number 59 of Kalibrated with Scott. I'm Scott, of course. If you guys wouldn't mind liking, subscribing, and sharing this, if you know my content, I'm sure you like it. You're back here watching it, so just spread it around. It's the easiest way you can help me. If you don't know my content, wait till the end, watch the whole video, see if you agree with me, and then like and subscribe if you if you do. So we have a lot to talk about today. Let's just get right into it. A little bit of housekeeping before we start. I have been AFK for a little bit, not from my Telegram or my Twitter, but from my podcasting. I've been extremely busy this last week, and then I was planning on doing one yesterday, but I had an insane migraine, so I just kind of blew it off. But I'm here today, and we have a lot to talk about, so we're just going to hop right in. I want to start with the counteroffensive, how it's progressing. We are now sitting at D plus 52 or 53. It's 11 p.m. local, so D plus 52 still. And I'll start with the Zaparosia front. On the Zaparosia front, the Ukrainians are getting absolutely massacred. I mean, it's one of probably the worst scenes I've seen from this conflict, this war, this SMO, whatever you like to call it. Around Robitny, the Ukrainians have gone on their 20th, 30th, 40th. I lost count. There's too many to count at this point. Attacks, assaults. They've achieved nothing still. Barely any ground has exchanged hands, and all of the ground that's exchanging hands is like a couple hundred meters at the most here and there. The Ukrainians are just running their head into this brick wall. The same thing is happening on the Verkimsky ledge, where the Ukrainians have also not made any progress in days. We've seen at least over the weekend and into Monday, 10 to 20 Bradleys get destroyed. We've seen multiple Leopards get hit. We don't have exact confirmation on how many have been destroyed, but I've at least seen 3 that were confirmed destroyed. So the Ukrainian offensive in Zaparosia, the primary focus of the Ukrainian counteroffensive and what they had talked about for months and months, is completely failing. I mean, flat on its face failing at this point. I have no issue saying that out loud. They're even saying it. Progress is quote unquote slow. And it's just not working out the way they wanted it to. I don't see the point in continuing in this direction, but they're still going and they're still taking losses. So, who am I to tell them what to do? The Ukrainian focus, though, now seems to have shifted towards Bakmut. Bakmut is the only sector where the Ukrainians are actually seeing any progress, mostly on the southern flank around Kleshchivka. This is probably going to be, if they can capture it, which it's contested right now. The Russians are in the northern half, the Ukrainians are in the southern half of the town. And by town, once again, 30, 40 houses, maximum population of like 100 before the war. This would be the first strategic objective if they captured it. They have yet to do that yet. We're 52 days in. The Ukrainians have lost thousands of men in this sector, basically in human wave assaults. They are not using as much armor in this area. They're using a lot more armor in the Zaparosia front, but around Bakmut, it's a lot of light vehicles and infantry moving through. And they are getting just decimated by artillery, drones. There's not a ton of Russian aviation in this sector, which is one of the reasons I think that the Ukrainians are actually making progress. They're not being hit by Russian aviation, so they're having a much easier time maneuvering. But even then, this town, this village is coming at an extreme cost. And if you look at a map, and I'll put one up here, the Ukrainians are not making any progress in this northern sector by Soledar. The idea of pushing into Kleshchivka and taking the southern flank is to pincer Bakmut and Soledar. That's not occurring. The top of the pincer on top of this whole salient is not advancing. It's not performing well. And without it, the push around Kleshchivka is just kind of forcing the Ukrainians into a situation where they're further away from their logistics lines. And it's not going to yield any results in Bakmut itself. However, the Ukrainians have captured the strategically important heights just west of Kleshchivka, and that gives them pretty good fire control and line of sight on the southern end of Bakmut. So There is something there. But once again, I would like everybody to ask themselves, what does the AFU get out of this push? From my perspective, and this is just me, this entire ploy, this plan, this switch of focus towards Bakmut is entirely political. I think that the Ukrainian high command and the government are now looking at a situation where their Zaparosia offensive is failing. It's just failed. And they can't go back with that. They can't just say, oh, well, it failed. We're going to do it later or try again. They can't do that. They have to achieve something. And one of the areas, probably the area where the Russian lines are the weakest, is around Bakmut. Bakmut is the most recently captured area. The Russians have the least amount of fortifications in this area. And the AFU have a really, really solid staging point in Konstantinivka, Chasov Yar, Kramatorsk, Slavyansk. They can bring in supplies readily, very easily. They have manpower readily available. Reserves in that area are housed pretty easily. So in terms of logistics, this area is the best for the Ukrainians. In terms of strategic importance, this area is completely void of it. I don't see what they're going for. The only thing I can think of, and this is where I, end up turning to a political battle, is that the Ukrainians think if the Russians lose Bakmut, which is their most recent achievement in Ukraine in the SMO, that there will be some sort of issue domestically in Russia, whether that's within the government apparatus, whether that's, the domestic population is losing confidence in the government, whatever it is. I think it's a very ill thought out plan, course of action, plan of attack. I don't really see how that's going to benefit Ukraine in the long term. Once again, Ukraine is losing an army trying to capture, recapture, defend Bakmut. Bakmut will, at the end of this conflict, be the Stalingrad, I believe, for Zelensky. The area that he should not have pushed, he should not have held on to for so long, and he should not have lost an army around on multiple occasions, in fact. And this all of this pushing around Bakmut comes at a very, very peculiar time for the Ukrainians, because just to the north, and this is actually very important, just north of Makivka in the LPR and up against the border of the Kharkov region, the Russians have made considerable gains. I'll put up a map right here so you can see it. This was, I guess, sort of unexpected. The Ukrainian lines here appear to be extremely fragile, and the Russians, almost unimpeded, it appears, have crossed over the Zhibyets River and are now securing a very, very large bridgehead north of Makivka and in between the Zhibyets and the Oskal River. This is an area where the Ukrainians are going to have a very hard time keeping supplied. The Oskal is the much better defense line. So if Russian progress in this area continues at such a fast rate, and they are progressing extremely fast. If you look at the Ukrainian counteroffensive versus this Russian offensive in the LPR, the Russians are actually taking pretty significant territory. They have created a bridgehead, which is a huge strategic event where they need to bridgeheads are hard. We've seen this multiple times throughout the conflict. We've seen the Russians get stopped and obliterated around river crossings. It's one of the most difficult things to accomplish, especially in modern warfare, where you have drones watching every single move you make, satellites, nothing's a secret, and river crossings expose yourself immensely to enemy artillery and aviation if they have it available. That's not what's happening. The Russians have crossed this. They've secured the bridgehead now. They are about 7 to 8 kilometers deep into Ukrainian territory on this other side. This should be concerning for anybody who follows this conflict and leans pro-Ukrainian. I would be very concerned, because while the Ukrainians are trying to push in some areas and achieving minor success here and there, the Russians are achieving greater success in an area where the Ukrainian lines are obviously very thin, and the supply situation is, unbalanced, risky at best, untenable at worst. So we could definitely see some immense Russian progress in the Liman Toresk area and also in the Makivka LPR area. And I wouldn't be surprised if the Russians activated extremely heavily in the Kupiansk area, just west of Liman Pershi. By Kupiansk, the Russians have gained another kilometer towards the Oskal River, and they're just probably going to follow the Oskal all the way down, cut off the road to Kupiansk, and then the entire eastern bridgehead of the Oskal River for the Ukrainians will be in jeopardy, and they will have to retreat. I think this is the Russian plan. This is a smart idea. I've said this before. I said this on Jackson Hinkle's podcast. I've said it on my podcast previously, and I'm sure you've heard it from me. So when I say this again, the Kharkov area for the Ukrainians is looking exactly like it did for the Russians back in August, September 2022, when the Ukrainians went on the offensive and just absolutely crippled the entire Kharkov region for the Russians. They just marched on through, very light and fast movements, infantry and light vehicles, and they got behind Russian lines and they just destroyed them because it was a skeleton crew. And really, that's what you're looking at for the Ukrainians. If we look back at that CNN article that I brought up in my last video, the Ukrainians are now reported to be firing 2,000 to 3,000 shells a week, or I'm sorry, a day, 2,000 to 3,000 shells a day. Across the entire front. Most of that is going to be in the Bakmut sector and around Zaparosia. This area is being neglected of artillery, modern weapon systems, and combat effective AFU troops. They're all preoccupied with their push around Bakmut, which I don't understand, and their push in Zaparosia, which at this point, I don't understand. I understood the strategic importance of it, but after you've continued to fail multiple times, it's just you just got to give it up at some point and cut your losses. There's that is it cost lost fallacy or something like that, where no matter how much it's being screamed in your face that this isn't going to work, you've already invested so much in these particular areas that if you don't succeed, at least mentally, you think the outcome of not succeeding is much worse than the incredible losses you could take to actually achieve what you want to achieve. That seems like what's happening in Bakmut, where Sersky is saying it's a matter of pride for Ukraine. You should never let pride interfere with your strategic planning and thinking. It should not be about what's going to restore pride and honor. It should be about what makes strategic sense militarily speaking, and that is not Bakmut or Zaparosia. So in the north, there is a nagging problem that's going to start appearing for the Ukrainians. They don't have defense lines up here like anywhere else. They don't have the manpower, the combat effective troops. They do not have the artillery expenditure in this area, and they're getting absolutely obliterated by RU artillery. It's hammering them. I mean, I've seen hundreds of videos coming out of this area of Ukrainian howitzers and SPGs getting hit. The Ukrainians actually have sent CV-90 Swedish IFVs, kind of like similar to a Bradley, not the same in any way. It's a completely separate build of an IFV, but same kind of idea. Heavy and a big gun on top. So it's a very good vehicle. And we've seen those getting destroyed because they're just not being supported in the proper way. And the Russians are making a lot of progress daily. It's not just, they achieved some breakthrough and then that's finished. It's day after day. This bridgehead is expanding and growing. More Russian troops are being brought across the Zhivyets River. And now they're poised, looking towards the actual Kharkov region, re-entering into Kharkov. They're about 2 kilometers, I think, away from the border of the Kharkov region. And I believe we're going to see in the next couple days, weeks, maybe month, the entirety of the LPR be resecured by RU forces. We'll see what happens in the south, in the Shibyansky Forestry, north of Seversk, and by Toretsk and Liman. But right now, the Russians are making steady incremental progress. The Ukrainian lines seem weak. Unless a bunch of reserves are moved from somewhere into this area, which I don't know if the Ukrainians even have available, we will see Russian progress very quickly. And this comes to what will the Ukrainians do to stop this? Will they sacrifice their push around Bakmut? That doesn't seem likely to me. It feels like Bakmut is their only chance to succeed, and they're going to push that with everything they have. Will they stop their pushes in Zaparosia? Possibly. But if you stop pushing in Zaparosia and you move all those troops away, the Russians will no longer be fixed in that area. They already have fortifications. There's not a risk of a breakthrough if you move away. So the Russians will just move their troops over as well. This is one of the big problems that the Ukrainians are coming up against, is that the Russians, with the mobilized infantry, the 300,000, however many are actually being used, they have highly mobile and combat-ready reserves. They can move them all around the board, and there doesn't seem to be any shortage of armored vehicles, tanks, Lancet drones, glide bombs, artillery. Ka-52s are still working hard in Zaparosia, stopping any chance for the Ukrainians to move forward. Minefields. There's just the Russians seem like they're on the ball right now. They are a sharpened knife, and then the Ukrainians are starting to look dull. The Ukrainians are using human wave tactics to punch through lines, so the casualties are immense. The Russians have actually started using cluster munitions in response to the United States sending cluster munitions and the Ukrainians using them in the SMO zone. So we have seen multiple videos of Ukrainian columns and units getting hit real hard by cluster munitions. And some people have brought up to me, and I've argued with this on Twitter, that the Russians have been using cluster munitions this entire conflict. This is just not true. I have yet to see a single piece of evidence that the Russians have been using these in combat. If you think about how many videos we have of Russian artillery falling on stuff, you would think we would have some more examples of cluster munitions falling on, our Ukrainian positions. We just don't have that. And the only examples I've seen are from very early in the war, like February 28th, so 4 days into the SMO, in the Kharkov region, some very light examples of it being used. And even then, I can't tell which side's firing it. The lines were so fluid at this time. It's just, it's not enough to say that the Russians have been using it this entire conflict. It's just not true. And exactly what I just mentioned, these videos that I was asking for, where are these combat videos of the Russians using cluster munitions? As soon as the Russians said that they were going to start using them, bang, like that. We have multiple videos of Russian cluster munitions doing a lot of damage. And if anybody listened to my video about the cluster munitions, you'll know that cluster munitions against defensive fortifications are not great. You want HE is the best. You want to disrupt trench lines, just absolutely ruin them and do a lot more damage. When you're in a fortified trench, cluster munitions are probably one of the most ineffectual tools you can use. But what they are really good for is hitting advancing troops that aren't in cover. And that's what the Ukrainians are doing right now, and they are getting smacked. So the situation in terms of the actual tactical situation on the ground is looking squishy for Ukraine, to say the least. And I don't expect it to progress particularly fast. I think the Russians will continue to do their slow, methodical movements. But in the north, at least, it looks like they are very much exploiting the recent gains that they've made. I wanted to touch on the grain deal and the Odessa strikes. So in my last video, which was part 2 of the Kerch Bridge incident, I showed some of the examples of the Ukrainian port in Odessa that was hit. Since then, the Russians have hit multiple Ukrainian ports and backup ports. Grain shipments in and out of the ports of Odessa, out of the Odessa Oblast, Nikolaev Oblast altogether have completely stopped. There is no more humanitarian corridor. The ships coming in and out will not be insured. So, I mean, they might be insured, but I doubt it with the risk that's posed to each of them. And I don't know if the people in the ships are really going to want to run a blockade like that. The Russians have said that they will hit ships that enter into the port of Odessa or head in that direction, and they will do so under the idea that they are delivering weapons to Ukraine, and that's that. In particular, in these Odessa strikes, we saw a strike on Reni, a small town on the Romanian Ukrainian border in the very, very southern part of Odessa. I'll put my map right here. And they were hit with Garand 2s. So a bunch of these Garand 2 kamikaze drones flew in to the region and landed. And this is a message. The Russians are sending a very, very clear, crystal clear message. There is no way around this grain deal. There is no way to force it. We will destroy any infrastructure related to the grain deal and Ukrainian grain exports if it's being utilized to try to bypass the now collapsed grain deal, or fulfill it in some way. And yeah, I mean, it's very clear. The Russians struck across the river from a NATO country in Romania. They're not, this isn't a game anymore. And the ships are heeding that message and not moving. So we'll see how it progresses. I expect the Russians to stand extremely firm on this. And what I don't think a lot of people understand is the impact that this will have on Turkey and Europe. This grain deal collapse means that Turkey's economy and domestic food inflation prices are going to go up. For the EU, the prices of food are going to skyrocket, which is a very big deal for places like Britain, who are currently sitting at, I think, 8% overall inflation. And on edible goods, food, I think they're sitting higher than that, above 10 for sure. So, the island is suffering and the people are suffering, and eventually all of this is going to catch up. Germany's in a recession. They can't handle higher food prices. France is already on fire most of the time. So I'm starting to look at Europe as this tinderbox. And as soon as it goes, there's going to be a lot of internal focus. And I think the subject of Ukraine is going to go by the wayside. As for the U.S., the food inflation prices are not as big of a deal. They don't really impact the U.S. as much. But without the grain deal, the prospects for Europe start to get shaky. And when everything starts to get shaky, it has consequences that you might not foresee. We could see Europe support nation by nation starting to drop. And then as that happens, U.S. confidence in the situation might decrease steadily. I don't know. We're coming into an election year in the United States, so something's got to change, either more support for Ukraine or some sort of off ramp. I can't imagine that Biden's going to go into his election year giving billions of dollars week after week to Ukraine. That's going to be so easy for somebody like Trump or DeSantis or Robert F. Kennedy to just absolutely pick apart. So I think that you're going to see some pretty big policy changes, whether behind closed doors or out in the open, coming soon. And we've seen that through the narrative shift. Everybody in the Western mainstream media now is writing articles about, preparing for this counteroffensive to fail, what Ukraine needs. The Ukrainians, Zelensky is now saying that he doesn't have enough equipment for the offensive. They were never given enough equipment. They weren't given enough ammunition, this, that, and the other. It's the bottom of the narrative hole, and there's no way out of it. I don't really know how the Ukrainians are going to make this work. They've just lost a huge chunk of their remaining economy through the cancellation of the grain deal. It's getting to the breaking point, and how the West responds will probably dictate the future of all of our lives. So it'll definitely be interesting, and I'll stay on top of it and keep covering it. If you guys like my content, you can find more on my Telegram, where I do full strike coverages if the Russians are striking Ukraine. And I cover a lot of stuff in my Telegram that I don't cover on my Twitter. My Twitter is more of my relaxation, fun place where I get to make jokes and stuff like that. So if you guys are interested in that, go follow me there. And if you made it this far, thank you so much. You guys are my core audience, and I appreciate you like no other. If you guys have anything you want from me, I'm open to suggestions. I'm trying to get on Spotify. I'm trying to do other things right now. I'm just incredibly busy, so I got a lot going on. But leave comments below. I usually go through almost all the comments on all my videos just to see what you guys have to say. And yeah, I appreciate it so much. And take care until next time. Bye.